"If that shrew gets a share, she'll regret it," my son Michael shouted, his voice echoing across the sunlit room filled with relatives and family friends gathered for the reading of my late husband's will. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly on my lap, observing the scene with a quiet patience that had been cultivated over decades. The polished oak floor reflected the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows, and the subtle scent of lavender from the centerpiece candles mingled with the faint aroma of fresh bread from the kitchen, grounding me in the calmness of the moment even as chaos erupted around me. Olivia, my daughter-in-law, froze mid-step, her expression tightening as she turned to face the room, realizing all eyes were on her. Michael's face was flushed with a mix of anger and the weight of unspoken family tensions, his usually composed demeanor fractured under the pressure of his own words. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that suggested a knowing calm rather than any immediate reaction, because I understood that words thrown in anger carried fleeting power, while composed observation revealed the real currents beneath. The soft rustle of papers and the quiet clearing of throats marked the room's shifting attention, and the lawyer standing by the mahogany table adjusted his glasses, carefully flipping through the legal documents with deliberate precision. I remembered how my husband, Charles, had always insisted on clarity and fairness in his estate planning, and I felt a renewed sense of calm in knowing that the documents themselves were an ally, impartial and firm. Olivia's gaze flickered toward me, seeking a reaction, but I remained still, allowing the tension to accumulate, letting it press against the walls of the room without releasing it in anger or confrontation. In that moment, I recalled the subtle behaviors that had unfolded over the past months. The unexplained financial transfers, the whispered phone calls, the sudden insistence on managing every detail of our family gatherings. Each action had been a piece of a larger pattern, and I could trace it now with the clarity that only comes from distance and reflection. Michael's voice had lost its initial edge as he looked down at the contract, his mind racing with both frustration and uncertainty. I leaned back slightly in the chair, feeling the familiar creak of the leather under my weight, and let the silence extend, filling the room with an almost tangible sense of anticipation. Guests shifted in their seats, some exchanging glances, sensing the undercurrent of drama without fully understanding it. The sunlight danced off the brass handles of the tall windows, and for a brief moment, everything in the room seemed frozen in suspended expectation. I took a slow, controlled breath, feeling the rhythm of my heart align with the measured tick of the antique wall clock, a reminder that time moved steadily forward, regardless of anger or accusations. My thoughts drifted to the years I had devoted to maintaining the household, celebrating family milestones, and ensuring the smooth operation of our lives, all without complaint. I acknowledged the quiet satisfaction in having done so with integrity, knowing that the truth of one's actions would always reveal itself more effectively than any outburst. Olivia shifted again, subtly, as though adjusting her stance for a confrontation that had not come, and I could see the tension in the line of her shoulders, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her hands unconsciously gripped the edge of the table. I remained seated, allowing each small gesture to register in my mind, cataloging them without judgment, preparing for the eventual moment when actions would speak louder than words. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees lining our driveway, a gentle reminder that the world continued beyond this enclosed stage of family conflict. I thought of the estate, the careful planning Charles had put into every clause, and the reassurance that the legal framework was robust, capable of withstanding impulsive declarations or temporary lapses of civility. I sipped lightly from a glass of water I had kept at my side, the coolness steadying my senses, allowing me to remain fully present, absorbing the scene in all its emotional complexity. The room felt taut, a web of glances and silent judgments, each person present caught between loyalty, curiosity, and the subtle anxiety of witnessing unrestrained emotion. I reminded myself that patience was a tool as sharp as any confrontation, and by remaining composed, I allowed the true measure of character to reveal itself naturally. Olivia's eyes met mine once more, and in that instant, a quiet understanding passed between us. I did not need to speak, and she did not need to admit guilt for me to perceive the truth. The lawyer finally cleared his throat, bringing the room's attention back to the formal proceedings, and the sense of inevitability settled in, an almost comforting weight against the chaos of emotions. I maintained my posture, a steady observer in the midst of the storm, knowing that every word, every movement, would contribute to the unfolding of consequences with a precision that only composure could provide. Time seemed to stretch, allowing each reaction, each glance, each micro-expression to imprint itself fully, and I allowed the space to remain charged, unbroken by impulsive remarks or defensive gestures. In that stillness, I felt the first stirrings of strategy, a subtle alignment of awareness and action, a recognition that the true power in this moment lay not in shouting or accusation, but in measured observation and preparation. The room held its collective breath, and I remained anchored, poised to act with clarity when the right moment presented itself, fully aware that restraint could often achieve more than any immediate outburst, and that in the quiet patience of observation, the unfolding narrative of truth and accountability was already taking shape around me. The room emptied slowly after the reading, leaving me with the quiet ticking of the antique clock and the faint hum of the air conditioning. I remained seated, observing the subtle shifts in the faces that lingered, noting how discomfort and curiosity mingled in their expressions. The sunlight had begun to tilt, casting long patterns across the polished floor, each ray highlighting the fine dust motes that floated lazily in the air. I let my thoughts drift back to the days leading up to this moment, when small inconsistencies in Olivia's behavior had first caught my attention. There were the carefully managed schedules that excluded me from family gatherings, the sudden insistence on handling finances that had never been her responsibility, and the hushed phone calls that ceased abruptly when I entered the room. Each act had seemed innocuous at the time, easily dismissed as coincidence or minor oversight. But now, in the clarity that comes with observation, they formed a coherent pattern. I recalled the quiet mornings in my sunlit kitchen, preparing breakfast with the familiar rhythm of routine, the aroma of fresh coffee and toasted bread providing comfort amidst subtle tension. Michael had been unusually preoccupied during these times, often answering calls with a tight smile or stepping away to discuss business matters, leaving Olivia to manage the household as she pleased. I watched her from the threshold on more than one occasion, noticing the way her fingers lingered over documents that were not hers to handle, the careful selection of phrases in casual conversations designed to steer outcomes subtly in her favor. In those moments, I had practiced patience, allowing events to unfold without interruption, recording each detail in the quiet of my mind. After the guests had gone, I rose and walked slowly to the window, observing the neatly trimmed hedges and the distant traffic moving along the avenue. The world outside moved with indifference to the tensions within my home, and I drew a small measure of comfort from that constancy. I reviewed in my mind the ledger of events, from minor financial discrepancies to social manipulations during family celebrations, understanding that the truth was cumulative, revealed through patterns rather than single acts. I poured myself a glass of water, the cool liquid steadying my thoughts, and returned to the sofa, settling into the familiar embrace of its cushions. I allowed the silence to envelop me, reflecting on the restraint I had maintained, knowing that reaction without strategy would only serve to empower misjudgments. I considered the documents before me, the legal framework that provided structure to my observations, and I noted the precision with which each clause anticipated potential disputes. The room remained empty, the faint scent of lavender from the centerpiece lingering as a reminder of order and calm. I walked to the sideboard, touching the smooth surface of polished wood, and let my gaze drift over the photographs of family milestones, each image a marker of shared history now tinged with complexity. The quiet was punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional chirp of birds outside, underscoring the contrast between external normalcy and internal vigilance. I thought of the upcoming days, the careful orchestration required to navigate conversations and interactions without revealing the depth of my understanding, knowing that patience and timing were as critical as any confrontation. The memory of Olivia's subtle shifts and Michael's fleeting expressions guided my anticipation of future encounters, preparing me to respond with deliberate precision. I allowed myself a brief moment to exhale, recognizing the clarity and calm that came from measured observation. Each movement within the household, each whispered conversation, and each social engagement were data points to be observed, understood, and, when necessary, acted upon with intent. I moved to the side chair, placing a notebook upon the table, and began cataloging events with quiet diligence, aware that written record would provide both clarity and a sense of control. The afternoon sun continued to track across the room, highlighting the edges of the pages and the soft texture of the leather-bound notebook. I noted the interplay of light and shadow across the walls, a subtle reminder that clarity often emerged in contrasts. I reflected on the importance of maintaining composure, understanding that patience was not passive but a strategic stance, allowing actions to reveal character and intentions. The room, once filled with the murmur of family and friends, now provided a canvas for contemplation, each detail of the environment reinforcing a sense of grounded perspective. I acknowledged the quiet satisfaction of knowing that observation, restraint, and careful documentation had positioned me to act decisively when the moment arrived, and I allowed the room to retain its stillness as the day progressed, each passing hour reinforcing the strength found in calm, deliberate awareness, preparing me for the unfolding consequences of the events that had just transpired. The evening settled over the house with a quiet that felt unusually heavy, the kind of stillness that presses against the chest without the intrusion of sound. I moved through the room slowly, noting how the shadows lengthened across the furniture, the warm glow of the lamps contrasting with the coolness that had settled in the corners. Each step I took was measured, the soles of my shoes whispering against the hardwood floors as I passed the dining room, where the day's events still lingered in the air. I paused by the fireplace, the flickering light catching the edges of family photographs, frozen smiles now tinged with the weight of unspoken truths. I thought about the small signs I had noticed over the past months, the subtle shifts in Olivia's demeanor, the way she had managed schedules and conversations to her advantage, and the meticulous attention she paid to details that were never her responsibility. It had taken time to see the pattern, but now the connections were undeniable, forming a clear picture of intent. I carried a notepad and pen with me, jotting notes silently as I walked, each observation recorded in careful detail, the ink a reminder of the methodical attention I paid to every nuance. In the study, I reviewed financial statements and correspondence, noting discrepancies and minor adjustments that, in isolation, seemed trivial, but together revealed a deliberate course of action. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant traffic outside provided a subtle soundtrack, grounding me in the rhythm of ordinary life even as the extraordinary unfolded in my reflections. I prepared tea, the familiar scent of chamomile and mint filling the air, and returned to the sofa with my notes spread before me. The soft cushions supported my posture as I traced connections between incidents, each line a thread in a web of manipulation that I now understood with clarity. I thought of Michael, the strain in his voice, the quick movements of his hands, and the subtle avoidance in his gaze. Each detail added to the mosaic of family dynamics that had become increasingly transparent to me. The room remained empty, and I allowed the silence to carry the weight of contemplation, each passing minute reinforcing the sense of control I maintained despite the outward appearances of calm. Outside, the wind stirred the trees along the driveway, the faint rustle of leaves a gentle reminder of the world continuing beyond these walls, indifferent to human tension and intrigue. I opened the notebook again, reviewing entries with a critical eye, confirming suspicions and noting the precision with which I had observed each event. The soft glow from the table lamp cast long shadows across the pages, illuminating words that captured both action and intent, ensuring that the narrative was complete, objective, and ready for the moments that required decisiveness. I reflected on the quiet power of patience, understanding that restraint often revealed more than confrontation, and that careful observation would allow me to respond with accuracy and strategy. I sipped the tea slowly, appreciating the warmth and the clarity it brought to my thoughts, and allowed the quiet to extend, embracing the rhythm of the home as it settled into night. Each room held its own echoes of the day, from the dining room's lingering scents to the soft rustle of curtains in the breeze, all of it cataloged in my mind as part of a larger understanding of the dynamics at play. I considered the subtle interplay of words, gestures, and expressions, noting how each had contributed to the unfolding narrative and how awareness of these factors positioned me to act decisively when necessary. The evening deepened, yet I remained alert, attuned to nuances in sound, light, and movement, each element providing insight into the unfolding family story. I arranged my notes and documents, creating an organized framework of observation and reflection, the careful documentation reinforcing both clarity and readiness. I understood that this calm vigilance was not mere patience, but a deliberate and strategic preparation, ensuring that every forthcoming interaction could be approached with informed poise, each step measured, each response intentional, and each moment approached with an awareness cultivated through careful observation and reflective analysis. The night deepened, and the house settled into an almost tangible quiet, the type that presses gently against the senses yet allows reflection to flow uninterrupted. I walked slowly through the living room, my hand trailing along the edge of the polished sideboard, feeling the smoothness of the wood and the familiar weight of the framed photographs that lined its surface. Each image, frozen in time, recalled birthdays, graduations, family dinners, and anniversaries, all moments that had been carefully curated and preserved over decades, yet now cast in a new light as I considered the subtle manipulations that had threaded through our recent lives. I paused by the window, gazing out at the trimmed hedges and the distant glow of street lamps, the world outside continuing in quiet indifference to the currents of tension and insight I held within. The papers I had arranged earlier remained spread across the coffee table, each document reviewed, each line noted for its implication, every signature and date carefully cross-referenced against memories of conversations and actions. I reflected on the measured behaviors I had observed in both Michael and Olivia, the subtle shifts in tone, the pauses, the careful choice of words, all of which had initially seemed mundane, now clearly forming a pattern of intent that could no longer be dismissed. I sipped from the cup of chamomile tea at my side, appreciating the warmth and clarity it brought, a quiet contrast to the storm of thoughts within. The room held its own ambience, the soft flicker of the fireplace casting long shadows that danced gently against the walls, accentuating the contrast between light and dark, certainty and uncertainty, observation and action. I allowed my thoughts to trace back through the weeks and months, considering small incidents, the redirected invitations, the managed schedules, the carefully timed errands that in hindsight carried a deliberate design, a subtle orchestration of circumstance that favored one narrative over another. Each recollection strengthened my understanding of the dynamics at play, confirming suspicions that had previously existed only as vague impressions. I moved to the study, retrieving a folder of correspondence and financial records, methodically reviewing entries and noting inconsistencies that reflected careful planning rather than oversight. The room was silent except for the gentle hum of the heating system and the faint rustle of pages as I turned them, absorbing the information with the calm determination of one accustomed to detailed scrutiny. My observations extended beyond the obvious. I considered the subtext of glances exchanged, the pauses in conversation, and the subtle tensions that had permeated previous family interactions. The awareness of these elements sharpened my focus and informed my understanding of motives and intentions. I traced each action to its potential impact, noting how carefully orchestrated sequences had created confusion and advantage, and I documented these findings with precision. The night air filtered in slightly through a partially open window, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden, a reminder of continuity and calm amidst the unfolding complexity of human relationships. I allowed the environment to reinforce my composure, grounding myself in tangible sensations while maintaining acute awareness of the social and emotional landscape. Each decision I considered was informed by a comprehensive understanding of events and intentions, every potential reaction measured against a backdrop of deliberate observation. I reflected on the virtue of restraint, recognizing that patience and attentiveness often achieved more than confrontation, that a strategic pause could reveal truths more clearly than any immediate assertion. The quiet allowed me to align my insights with planned responses, preparing for interactions that would occur in the coming days, ensuring each engagement was approached with awareness, clarity, and deliberate poise. I returned to the sofa, placing the documents neatly on the side table, and allowed myself a few moments to consider the unfolding patterns, the interplay of actions, words, and reactions that defined the recent chapter of our family life. The stillness enveloped me, a companion to the sharp focus of thought, reinforcing a sense of control and readiness that extended beyond immediate observation to informed preparation. Each passing minute, each subtle sound, each minor shift in light or shadow was cataloged and processed, creating a holistic awareness that would guide my responses with precision and deliberation. The night pressed on, the house a quiet witness to reflection and understanding, and I remained poised, knowing that informed patience and careful observation were the most potent instruments in navigating the complex tapestry of human intention and family dynamics. The next morning arrived with the gentle light of dawn spilling through the tall windows, illuminating the living room in soft hues of gold and amber. I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of herbal tea, the steam curling upward, carrying a subtle aroma of chamomile that seemed to steady my thoughts. Outside, the garden glistened with dew, the roses nodding gently in the early breeze, and the quiet chirping of birds provided a gentle rhythm that contrasted with the persistent tension I carried in my awareness. As I reviewed the events of the previous day, I reflected on the careful observations I had made, cataloging each nuance, each hesitation, each subtle glance that had revealed more than words could convey. The ledger of actions and the details I had recorded in my notebook provided a map of intentions, a pattern emerging from the complex interactions of our family. I noted how Olivia had navigated the room with calculated poise, ensuring that every smile, every pause, and every exchange worked subtly in her favor, all while presenting the appearance of innocence and consideration. Michael, too, revealed himself through his unguarded moments, his expressions occasionally betraying doubt and the shifting currents of allegiance within our small circle. I allowed myself to visualize the scenario of forthcoming encounters, preparing responses that would be deliberate, measured, and guided by the evidence I had carefully compiled. Each interaction could be approached with calm authority, ensuring that I retained control without the need for confrontation or raised voices. The aroma of freshly baked bread from the previous evening lingered faintly in the air, a quiet reminder of the domestic world in which these personal dramas unfolded, anchoring my focus in the ordinary while my mind traced the extraordinary patterns. I reviewed past correspondence and financial statements, noting the small but consistent adjustments, the subtle redirections that confirmed the deliberate orchestration of events. Each line, each note, each record became a piece of the puzzle, revealing the broader strategy at play and reinforcing the clarity of my observations. I reflected on the skill required to maintain composure, to observe without interjection, and to allow actions and words to disclose truth naturally. The sun rose higher, casting brighter light across the polished hardwood floors, the reflections dancing subtly as I moved about, collecting notes and reviewing observations. I considered the implications of each decision, the potential reactions of both Michael and Olivia, and how to navigate forthcoming moments with precision and care. I measured the tone of voice I might employ in conversation, the pacing of words, and the careful selection of phrasing to ensure maximum clarity without provocation. Each gesture, each pause, each thoughtful alignment of information was a deliberate exercise in maintaining influence and control without aggression. The quiet house supported my reflection, allowing me to plan the day with attention to detail, anticipating interactions, and preparing to respond strategically when the opportunity presented itself. I considered the cumulative effect of minor acts, the careful calibration of observation and patience, and how these would guide my next steps in a manner that preserved dignity while asserting awareness and preparedness. The gentle warmth of sunlight through the windows highlighted the arrangement of the furniture and the small details that often went unnoticed, reinforcing the sense of order I maintained amidst the complexity of human relationships. I sipped the tea slowly, allowing the taste and warmth to anchor my mind, and reviewed my notes one final time, reaffirming the methodical understanding I had cultivated. Each action taken, each interaction observed, and each preparation made was part of a larger strategy, one that relied upon patience, clarity, and careful attention to the nuances of behavior and intention, ensuring that when the moments of confrontation arrived, they would be met with deliberate, composed, and informed response. The afternoon light slanted through the half-open blinds, casting stripes across the polished hardwood floors of the living room. I sat in my favorite armchair, a cup of warm tea cradled in my hands, and allowed myself to observe the house as though seeing it anew. The events of the past days played in my mind, a sequence of subtle movements and conversations, each one revealing nuances of intention and hidden motives. I reflected on Olivia's meticulous attention to schedules, the careful shaping of narratives, and the quiet influence she exerted over Michael, all designed to maintain the appearance of harmony while benefiting her own interests. I reviewed my own actions, the patience I had maintained, the deliberate choice not to react impulsively during moments of tension, and I recognized the quiet power embedded in restraint. Each observation, every minor hesitation or glance, was recorded mentally with the precision of a chronicle, adding layers to a portrait of understanding that would guide my next steps. The house was still, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only background sound, blending with the faint rustle of leaves outside the window and the occasional distant traffic. I considered the subtle shifts in tone during conversations, the careful modulation of voice that could reveal more than words themselves, and the importance of listening beyond the surface. Each detail contributed to an intricate tapestry of comprehension, allowing me to anticipate and prepare for the moments when engagement would be necessary. I placed my tea on the side table and opened my notebook, reviewing previous notes on interactions, financial matters, and observed behavior, reinforcing the clarity of my understanding. The sunlight caught the edges of the pages, highlighting the precise entries I had recorded, each one a thread in the evolving narrative of the family dynamic. I reflected on the necessity of maintaining composure, the art of timing, and the value of observing without immediate reaction, knowing that the power in the situation lay in measured responses rather than overt confrontation. The scent of lavender from a small vase on the mantel mingled with the warm aroma of the tea still lingering in the air, grounding me in the present and offering a gentle counterbalance to the intensity of the mental exercise. I allowed myself to move through the room deliberately, each step a practice in mindfulness, each pause an opportunity to take in the interplay of light, shadow, and atmosphere, recognizing how the environment shaped perception and attention. I considered Michael's expressions in recent encounters, the subtle cues that betrayed uncertainty, and the faint tension underlying interactions that otherwise appeared routine. I envisioned forthcoming conversations, planning the measured articulation of questions, observations, and insights, each word to be delivered with precision to elicit clarity and understanding without provocation. The afternoon deepened, the light shifting across surfaces, illuminating small details previously unnoticed, from the texture of the furniture to the subtle reflection of leaves on the polished floor. I sat back and allowed a moment of calm reflection, integrating all observations, prior knowledge, and meticulous documentation into a coherent understanding of the current state of affairs. The soft ticking of the clock provided a steady cadence, reinforcing a sense of time passing deliberately, each second a reminder that patience and careful attention would guide the unfolding events. I closed my notebook gently, acknowledging the strategic advantage provided by careful observation, and felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the awareness cultivated over hours and days would inform actions in the near future. Each measured movement, each conscious pause, and each deliberate consideration reinforced the presence of calm authority, ensuring that when the moment came to act, it would be executed with clarity, poise, and intentional precision, maintaining dignity while navigating the complex terrain of family interactions. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting warm, elongated rays across the living room and catching the soft glint of the polished hardwood floors. I remained in my armchair, the weight of recent reflection pressing gently into a calm awareness that had settled over me like a quiet companion. Each photograph on the walls seemed to tell a layered story, capturing moments of joy and routine while silently acknowledging the complexities of relationships that had always existed beneath the surface. The gentle hum of the heating system and the occasional distant sound of traffic outside were the only indicators of movement beyond the walls of our home, reinforcing a sense of seclusion and focus that allowed me to consider events with deliberate clarity. I reviewed the observations I had meticulously recorded, each line and notation forming a web of insight into patterns of behavior, subtle manipulations, and the small gestures that often revealed true intention. Olivia's careful orchestration of schedules, her skillful guidance of conversation, and the management of appearances that masked underlying motives all became distinctly clear through the lens of patient observation. Michael's expressions, once interpreted only as fleeting emotion, now communicated underlying concern and internal conflict, adding depth to the understanding of the family dynamic. I reflected on my own conduct, the restraint I had maintained, the deliberate choice to observe rather than react, and the profound effectiveness of calm awareness. Each detail, from the slight tightening of lips to the brief hesitation before a response, was catalogued and interpreted as part of a larger narrative. I rose slowly and moved to the window, looking out across the garden where the roses and hydrangeas glistened in the soft light of late afternoon, the delicate swaying of branches a quiet reminder of continuity amidst the unfolding human complexities. I allowed my mind to reconstruct scenarios, anticipating interactions with both precision and patience, each possible word and gesture mapped against my careful understanding of intentions and likely outcomes. The room was imbued with a serene order, the arrangement of furniture, the gentle alignment of light and shadow, and the soft textures of the upholstery all contributing to an environment that supported focused reflection. I returned to the sofa, spreading my notes across the coffee table, reviewing each point with deliberate attention to detail, reinforcing a sense of preparedness and readiness that had been cultivated through observation. The coolness of the ceramic cup in my hands grounded me further as I considered the impact of my forthcoming actions, recognizing that deliberate, thoughtful steps would allow for clarity and influence without confrontation. I noted the rhythm of the household, the small cues that indicated attention or distraction, and the subtle interactions that would inform timing and approach in future engagements. Each observation reinforced a layered comprehension, a careful mapping of relationships and tendencies that allowed for strategic preparation. I considered the interplay of emotion, history, and expectation, understanding that the nuances of influence were often conveyed through measured presence rather than overt assertion. The room remained still, the light shifting slowly with the passage of time, highlighting details that had previously escaped notice: the grain of the wood, the glint of glassware, the subtle angles of shadows that mirrored the intricacies of human behavior. I allowed the calm and focus to permeate, ensuring that my understanding was thorough and my readiness complete. Each passing moment strengthened the clarity with which I could navigate forthcoming conversations, allowing for responses that were informed, precise, and measured. I acknowledged the value of observation, patience, and the silent accumulation of knowledge, appreciating how restraint had positioned me with both insight and authority, ensuring that when interaction was necessary, it would be executed with deliberate control, composure, and unwavering awareness of the intricacies woven into the tapestry of our family life. The late afternoon light softened as it filtered through the drapes, painting the living room in gentle shades of amber and cream. I remained seated in my armchair, my hands wrapped around the warmth of a ceramic cup, appreciating the calm that contrasted with the subtle undercurrents of family tension that lingered in the air. The polished hardwood floor reflected the shifting light, and the soft scent of lavender from the small vase on the mantel contributed to a quiet sense of serenity. I allowed my mind to trace the sequence of events, reviewing the observations I had carefully compiled, each detail providing clarity about actions, motives, and subtle manipulations. Olivia's precise movements, the careful framing of conversations, and the orchestration of appearances had all been evident, but now, viewed through deliberate attention and patience, the patterns were undeniable. Michael's reactions, his occasional hesitation, the shifts in his tone and expression, all revealed a depth of internal conflict that added layers to the understanding of our family dynamic. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth and aroma center my thoughts, and noted how even the smallest gestures, from a glance to a paused smile, carried information about intention and disposition. I reviewed documents and notes, cross-referencing events with financial records and correspondence, confirming observations and validating the insights that had been building over time. Each entry reinforced a narrative of careful planning and subtle influence, emphasizing the importance of measured response over impulsive action. I moved to the window and gazed out at the garden, the early evening light highlighting the flowers and casting long shadows that mirrored the intricate web of human interactions I had been observing. The calm outside served as a counterpoint to the complexity within, reminding me that clarity and presence were tools as powerful as any verbal assertion. I allowed my thoughts to simulate forthcoming interactions, considering phrasing, timing, and the pacing of words to ensure that engagement could occur with precision and composure. The room held its quiet ambience, the hum of the heating system, the distant sound of traffic, and the subtle creak of floorboards all blending into a rhythm that supported focused contemplation. I organized my notes, laying out documents and observations in a manner that highlighted relationships between actions and consequences, preparing for discussions and decisions that required both insight and discretion. The interplay of light and shadow across the room accentuated familiar surfaces, revealing textures and angles that offered both comfort and subtle cues for attention. Each observation and reflection reinforced my understanding of patience as an instrument of influence, demonstrating how restraint could uncover truth more effectively than immediate confrontation. I considered the accumulation of insights, the anticipation of dialogue, and the mapping of behavior that informed potential responses, appreciating the layered understanding that patience had cultivated. I remained attentive to the faintest shifts in the room, the smallest variations in light, sound, and movement, recognizing that each contributed to a comprehensive perception of the environment and the people within it. I reflected on the quiet authority of presence, the deliberate pacing of thought and action, and the strategic value of observation, understanding that these elements combined to create readiness and clarity. The soft evening glow continued to deepen, enveloping the room in warmth while supporting the cool clarity of thought, allowing me to integrate all observations into a coherent understanding that would guide future interactions. I felt a steady confidence in the knowledge accumulated through careful attention, realizing that the combination of patience, awareness, and deliberate documentation had positioned me to engage with both composure and insight when the moment arrived, ensuring that each step taken would be measured, intentional, and informed by a thorough understanding of family dynamics, motivations, and subtle patterns of behavior. The evening had fully descended, and the house was draped in the soft shadows of the lamplight, the warm glow creating pockets of light that highlighted the familiar textures of furniture and walls. I sat quietly in my armchair, reflecting on the cascade of events that had brought us to this moment, the careful observations and deliberate attention to detail that had defined the past days now coalescing into a coherent understanding. The subtle shifts in Michael's expressions, the nuanced behaviors of Olivia, and the patterns of interactions that had once seemed innocuous now revealed an intricate web of motives and intent. I reviewed in my mind the steps I had taken, the patience maintained, the careful documentation, the thoughtful consideration of each possible reaction, all of which had positioned me with clarity and insight. The quiet rustle of leaves outside the window provided a gentle soundtrack, contrasting with the intensity of mental focus that the day had required, grounding me in the rhythm of life beyond the walls of the home. I considered the final elements of preparation, ensuring that each forthcoming engagement would be approached with precision and measured composure, the culmination of careful planning, keen observation, and the understanding that restraint often conveyed more influence than overt expression. The photographs on the walls, the mementos on the shelves, and the familiar objects around the room became a backdrop to reflection, each one a marker of history and context that informed the present moment. I reviewed the timeline of events, each detail cataloged, each subtle gesture accounted for, understanding how the interplay of intention and perception had shaped the current state of affairs. The warmth of the tea I sipped provided a comforting steadiness, allowing me to maintain calm focus while mapping out the nuances of the human behaviors I had witnessed. I visualized the potential conversations and interactions, anticipating responses and strategizing phrasing, ensuring that clarity and insight would guide my engagement. The room was filled with a sense of quiet authority, the accumulated knowledge of careful observation creating a presence that was both composed and perceptive. I noted the interplay of light and shadow across surfaces, the subtle indications of movement and pause, the way each element contributed to an overall understanding of the environment and the people within it. Reflection allowed me to integrate observations with foresight, creating a mental map of influence, timing, and opportunity that would guide the next steps with deliberate intention. I considered how patience, composure, and strategic insight had prepared me to respond effectively when the moment arrived, ensuring that the careful accumulation of understanding would be translated into deliberate and informed actions. The house remained still, yet alive with the echoes of past events and the promise of clarity in forthcoming engagements, each detail reinforcing the power inherent in observation and measured response. I leaned back slightly, absorbing the interplay of environmental cues and human behavior, understanding that each moment was part of a larger narrative shaped by patience, awareness, and thoughtful action. The night deepened, and I allowed myself to anchor in the certainty provided by careful reflection, knowing that the culmination of days of attention, insight, and restraint would now inform every engagement with deliberate clarity, measured composure, and the quiet authority of understanding, ensuring that when the time came to act, it would be with precision, poise, and unshakable awareness of the subtleties that defined the unfolding family dynamics. Follow the dramatic journey of the elderly mother and her daughter-in-law in this gripping family story, where tensions unfold during the reading of a will. Witness the careful observation and quiet strength of the mother as she notes subtle manipulations, catalogs interactions, and plans her measured responses in this family story, revealing a web of intent and calculated behaviors. Experience the layered emotions and strategic patience as the mother navigates the complex dynamics of her family, balancing insight and composure in a story that exemplifies resilience and awareness in familial conflicts, making this family story both compelling and relatable. Observe the interplay between the mother and her son, whose reactions reflect the nuanced pressures and loyalties within a household, as the mother maintains control and insight in this intricate family story. And finally, appreciate the careful detailing of actions, gestures, and observations that culminate in a thoughtful exploration of human relationships, patience, and influence, highlighting the timeless lessons embedded in a family story where awareness and restraint shape outcomes and reveal deeper truths. Character 1: elderly woman Margaret Wilson, approximately 72 years old, wearing a navy blue dress, standing full front-facing perspective with calm and composed expression, white skin, realistic lighting, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. Character 2: daughter-in-law Olivia Wilson, approximately 40 years old, wearing a professional blouse and skirt, standing full front-facing perspective with confident expression, white skin, realistic lighting, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. 1. Margaret Wilson and Olivia Wilson confront each other in the living room. Tension palpable as they face each other with piercing gazes, the sunlight streaming through tall windows casting sharp shadows, highlighting the strain and emotional stakes between them. Every subtle movement and expression charged with anticipation. The atmosphere heavy with unsaid words and psychological intensity, floor polished and reflecting light. Furniture arranged to emphasize confrontation, body language, revealing conflict, realistic lighting and environment capturing high drama. 2. Margaret Wilson in her kitchen preparing breakfast, soft morning sunlight illuminating her focused expression, hands methodically arranging plates and pouring coffee, casual home attire, warm domestic atmosphere, subtle details of a lived-in home, such as a vase with fresh flowers and neatly organized utensils, capturing her calm composure and routine, realistic lighting emphasizing textures and materials, sense of tranquility and introspection in her personal space. 3. Olivia Wilson at her home office desk reviewing documents, professional attire with blouse and skirt, morning sunlight filtering through blinds, computer screen casting a soft glow on her focused face, pens and organized paperwork around her, posture indicating confidence and determination, walls adorned with shelves of books and awards, small personal touches visible, realistic lighting highlighting skin tone and textures, conveying ambition, diligence, and the everyday life of the character. 4. Both Margaret Wilson and Olivia Wilson together in the study confronting the lawyer representing family matters, expressions tense and concentrated, body language indicating strategic positioning and psychological engagement, documents spread on the table, soft natural lighting through the windows casting shadows across the room, subtle reflections on the polished surfaces, sense of layered interpersonal dynamics and stakes, capturing the tension and complexity of interactions with a third party, all characters present in the frame with realistic proportions and scale. 5. Margaret Wilson alone in the garden during late afternoon, soft sunlight filtering through trees, hands clasped on the railing, contemplative gaze over the flowering hedges, casual dress appropriate for the setting, wind gently moving leaves, serene atmosphere with emphasis on texture and color of flowers and greenery, capturing a reflective moment, realistic lighting and depth emphasizing isolation and thoughtfulness. Minor details like a cup of tea on a small table nearby enhancing realism. 6. Margaret Wilson and Olivia Wilson in the living room at dusk. Final scene with subtle reconciliation or acknowledgement. Warm indoor lighting highlighting facial expressions and body posture. Both characters positioned to show mutual awareness and emotional resolution. Furniture softly illuminated, shadows creating depth and texture, subtle reflections on polished surfaces. Sense of narrative closure and emotional culmination, realism in lighting, materials, and environmental details, conveying completion and nuanced resolution of tension between the two characters. 1. Margaret Wilson and Olivia Wilson confront each other in a large sunlit living room, standing full front facing each other with piercing gazes and tense expressions. White skin, realistic lighting. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Sunlight streaming through tall windows casting sharp shadows on the polished floor. Furniture arranged to emphasize confrontation, their body language intense revealing subtle emotional conflict, both characters showing visible strain and anticipation in this cinematic dramatic scene. 1. 2. Margaret Wilson in her kitchen preparing breakfast. Early morning, full front perspective. Calm, focused expression. White skin, realistic lighting. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Soft sunlight illuminating the room highlighting textures of countertops, dishes, and utensils. Casual attire, flowers on the counter, tea steaming from cup, hands arranging plates methodically capturing domestic routine and composure. Peaceful reflective atmosphere emphasizing daily life. Cinematic realism. 1. 3. Olivia Wilson in her home office reviewing documents. Full front perspective, confident and determined expression. White skin, realistic lighting. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Morning sunlight filtered through blinds, computer screen, soft glow on face, professional attire, blouse and skirt, organized papers and pens around her, books and awards on shelves, subtle personal touches showing everyday ambition, focus and diligence, realistic textures and materials, cinematic attention to detail. 2. 4. Margaret Wilson and Olivia Wilson together confronting lawyer at study table. Full front perspective, tense concentrated expressions, white skin, realistic lighting. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Documents spread across table, polished surfaces reflecting light, shadows emphasizing depth. Both characters showing strategic positioning, interacting with third-party body language, suggesting subtle psychological engagement. Cinematic framing highlighting complex family dynamics and stakes. 1. 2. 5. Margaret Wilson alone in garden late afternoon. Full front perspective, contemplative, serene expression. White skin, realistic lighting. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Soft sunlight filtering through trees, flowers and greenery, detailed textures, hands clasped on railing. Casual dress, gentle breeze, leaves moving, cup of tea nearby, capturing reflective personal moments. Cinematic focus on atmosphere, natural beauty and realistic depth. 1. 6 Margaret Wilson and Olivia Wilson in living room at dusk, full front perspective, subtle reconciliation, acknowledgement expressions, white skin, realistic lighting, no cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Warm indoor lighting, highlighting posture and facial expressions, soft shadows, creating depth, polished surfaces, reflecting light, both characters showing awareness and emotional closure, cinematic composition, emphasizing nuanced resolution and realistic textures. 1, 2.